Welcome to another edition of Just Thinking. I'm Mary Greendale, and joining me again today for our quarterly report and update is Representative Carolyn Dykema. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you, Mary.
Happy New Year.
Yes, Happy New Year to you.
2020.
Hard to believe it is already.
I can remember when it was just, the TV show or what your vision was supposed to be, but here it is for real. It's a whole year.
And 60 degrees.
And it's 60 degrees, and who knows about that? Is that global warming? Let's not go there. Anyway, so how have things been? How have you been?
Good. Everything is great. Had a great holiday. We're empty nesters now, as I think you knew, so we had all the kids home at once, which doesn't happen that often, so it was nice.
That's good.
But glad to be back at it for the new year.
And does it look like it'll be a busy one?
It will be really busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, with transportation at the top of the list. That's been talked about. We were going to take it up in the House in the fall, and that got pushed back, so now we're actively meeting with people in the building talking about priorities, and I expect that will be coming up in the next few months.
Well, that's where I wanted to start, so let's do that. So what are the priorities from the state's perspective?
Sure. So one of the things that we had talked about was public transit, and that's high on my radar. And there are things on the state perspective that we're talking about, things like buses and the T. From our district, obviously, there are different priorities, one of which is the commuter rail. And, the Mass Pike congestion is what everybody's talking about, right? I think any of us who have been here for any period of time in the last 5 to 10 years have seen the dramatic congestion. So it's about how do we find solutions for congestion. It's about how do we meet the needs of our employers by moving employees, either into the city or in our case from out of the, from the city out to our way, and just quality of life. It just takes too long to get everywhere. So we're looking at everything from new revenue potentially to start paying for upgrades to commuter rail, MBTA, buses, to things like creative incentives for how can we encourage employers to offer work from home or flexible schedules or anything that we can do to kind of move the cars off the road. And you mentioned climate change. That's obviously a piece of this is how do we, knowing that transportation sector is about 30% of our overall emissions here in Massachusetts. If we're going to be serious about tackling climate, we need to tackle transportation. So all of that will be part of the conversation.
Which looks the most likely? Any one of those things got a chance?
Well, I'd say the idea for revenue, I assume is what you're talking about, that seems to have the most support is what's called TCI, or a Transportation Climate Initiative.
Is this the regional one?
This is the regional one. So it's essentially what most people think of as a carbon tax, but it's regional in nature. There are, I believe it's 9 states and D.C. that are involved now. They're actively negotiating to come to an agreement on how the program would be structured. And the governor and Secretary Theoharides from EEA here in Mass are kind of leading the charge. Massachusetts is clearly leading on this effort. And so that's expected. If that happens, and there's a lot of details still to be discussed, they're looking at 2022 for implementation. Now,
as I have understood from what I've read or heard, it's really a user fee as opposed to a tax. I draw the distinction, the only way in my head that I can think about it is I'm taxed for things I don't use. I don't have children in the public schools. Okay, I have grandchildren, but fees are something that I actually do. I impose a cost. I use a program at the camp, or my water. I may not want to pay the fee for the $75, but I'm going to be using that. When you talk about this carbon tax kind of thing, what are you talking about? How do they get those revenues?
Well, for TCI in particular, it's what you call cap and invest. So there is a cap on the amount of emissions that can be expended out of the transportation sector, and there would be an associated cost at the wholesale level is what it's looking like. So if you go above whatever that limit is, and that limit declines over time, then you have to pay an additional amount of money into a kitty that would then be used to fund transportation needs. So it's really more a pass-through from the wholesaler to the user, unlike a gas tax, which is actually on a per gallon basis. This is really kind of a one fee that will be distributed
over everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Greendale, and this is Just Thinking. And picking up on my previous show about race, today I'm actually going to jump in it with both feet, and I'm going to talk to a former Hollistonian, a fellow who graduated from here. His name is Cecil Wright. And those of us who are really old will remember his father. And Cecil's father was a part of the highway department. And because he was Black in a very white town, maybe even whiter than today, we all knew him. He was obvious, but he was also a very cheerful fellow who was happy to talk to anybody. So today we have the pleasure of talking to his son, Cecil, who was in Nova Scotia, where I'd really love to be right about now. But anyway, so welcome, Cecil. I am so happy to meet you.
Well, it's a real pleasure, Mary. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So I got to your front door because you wrote an article that was posted on a New England Patriots page. And it was apparently you have some loyal followers here in Holliston, some folks who maybe went to school with you or knew you growing up. And they notified me about the story and sent it to me or sent me the link. And I read it and was surprised about so many different pieces in it that I just really had to talk to you. So we're going to start right off the bat and say, you're from a Black community in Nova Scotia. And this was like, I didn't realize that Blacks had gone so far north, because you also sent a note to me and said you were right out of the slavery economy, the slave economy. Your family, your ancestors came from there. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize they had gone so far north.
Well, fortunately, my ancestors were loyalists who fought on behalf of the British. The British promised freedom and land and opportunity in Canada if my ancestors decided to fight for them. So they, of course, wanted freedom, fought on behalf of the British, and ended up in Beachville, Nova Scotia, which is a small little tiny community outside Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is where I currently reside. My ancestors came up from the Chesapeake Bay area of Virginia. I know that much, and I really can't tell you too much more than that because, unfortunately, our history, my history, was never really taught in schools or institutions of higher learning. All we really were taught was about Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, and good for Abe, but what about contributions that Blacks and other minorities made? I mean, look at the contribution from the Asian community as far as the railroads, and things like that weren't really taught in school, and that's one huge oversight that I think will go a long way to quell a lot of the racial unrest that we have right now.
That's a very good point. Now, you came to Holliston from where? From Roxbury? You ended up in Roxbury for a period of time, and then you moved from Roxbury, which is clearly a Black community, then and now, and you moved to Wonder Bread White. I mean, that's it. That's it. And so just briefly tell me the story you just told me before we went on air about your parents' problem finding housing.
Yeah, it's at first, I was kind of upset for my parents, but, then, as my mom said, the Lord sent a savior. My parents had gone to 3 or 4 different realtors after my father had been offered the job with the Holliston Highway Department by Roy Hulbert. And the guy who introduced them, by the way, passed away a few years ago, was on the board of selectmen named Loring Lovewell.
Yeah, a good friend of mine.
He's the man who's responsible for us coming to Holliston. So we owe his family a great debt of gratitude, as well as the Hulbert family, because Mr. Hulbert, Roy Hulbert, was the superintendent who hired Dad. But after that offer had been made, Mom and Dad had gone to about 3 or 4 different realtors in Holliston, and none of them would rent a small 2-bedroom home to them. And, they didn't want to think it was because they were Black, but, in all honesty, that's the thing that they were thinking about. That was on, both their minds. So.
Hi, it's Mary Greendale again for Just Thinking. Today we're actually even talking across country. So we're going to be talking about a special organization in East Africa, in Uganda in particular. And we're going to be talking to the founder and to her mother. Now, the mother may be especially familiar to you if you've gone to school in Holliston, Mary Beth Numbers, and her daughter Krista, whose last name is now Preston, right? Okay, so we'll be talking to them. The program is called Embrace Culture, and I actually remember when it started, and I remember that Krista was on the forefront of that as the founder. And the need for the program was because of the way that handicapped or special needs children are mistreated, or treated, if you want to look at it that way, in Africa. You and I both know that there are plenty of people in this country who suffer from certain stigma. But when you hear the stories about these folks, these kids, you'll come to appreciate what it really, really means to be unlike everyone else in a culture that just doesn't have any room for you in their hearts or anywhere else. So Mary Beth Numbers and Krista Preston, thank you very much for agreeing to join me today. I know that Ann Buckley, I want to do a shout out to Ann because it was Ann that kind of put us all together. Ann's been a great champion of your program, but also just a champion extraordinaire for the Holliston schools, for a whole lot of students and a whole lot of teachers within them. So I just wanted to give her a shout out because she's been such a great lady. Anyway, so let's talk about what is Embrace Culture exactly. You've got a great logo. I love it. So which one of you want to kick us off with that?
I will kick off to that, and thank you for the shout out on the logo. That was actually designed by another Hollistonian, Nick Abbey.
Who was it?
Yeah, we're keeping it all in town here. Holliston is really the reason this is all going. So Embrace Culture, it really started, actually the concept of it started way back in 2013. As many who do know Mary Beth know that she is a special ed teacher and that we have disabilities in our family. And I decided to go to Africa to do volunteering as a special ed teacher in an elementary school. The way they did it in Africa was they have general schools and then they have special needs schools. So they're
totally
segregated at this point. So I went to one of the special ed schools and I started working as a teacher there. I did that for about a year and it was very enlightening just to be a teacher there. I worked with what we classify as moderately to severely cognitively disabled children. I would say in the US, you typically have a 1-to-1 ratio with students like this, either a teacher to a student or an aide to a student. Mm-hmm. The classroom I was leading was 34-to-1. Mm-hmm. So we kind of played the game of just survive the day. And after a truly outstanding year there, I had grown pretty close with some of the students, and I wanted to see what their life was like outside of the school setting. So I started to adventure into the villages, and that's when this had to become more than just a volunteer experience. When I went out into the villages, I found out that these segregated schools were actually safe havens. Because in the village, many of these children were considered to either be cursed or to honestly be possessed by evil spirits. And they are unfortunately hidden away. Many are locked up or they're targeted for abuse. And life outside of school is short and hard. So I got together with a group of Ugandans and we talked about this issue and what could be done, and that was the birth of Embrace Culture. So it started with working with schools and then helping students transition into the community after school.
How did the communities react when you stepped into their world? How were the people? Did they push back?
You know what? That was probably the most amazing part of it all. I expected a lot of pushback.